One of the most requested features for Entity Framework that was finally added in EF5 was the ability to use enums. Without enum support, we had to use workarounds, but now the model does support enums. As I tried to make clear in the first module of this video, this support is only available with .NET 4.5. When EF6 is released, it will be possible to have enums with .NET 4 as well, but with EF5, to get enum support, you must combine it with .NET 4.5. Along with this, the Entity Framework Designer in Visual Studio 2012 allows you to use enums in an EDMX. I'll show you how that works. Remember that I changed the ship method database column, so now it's an integer in the database and in my model. I want to use that integer as an enum, so I'll need to do two things. First, I'll define an enum in the model, and then I can set the type of the ship method property to that enum. After I demonstrate this, I'll show you how you can also use an enum that exists elsewhere in your application or even in .NET. To add a model-based enum for use with an EDMX, you start by defining your enum in the model browser. The designer surface is only for displaying entities and their associations. Visual Studio 2012 knows that I'm using .NET 4.5, and therefore it's giving me access to enums in the model browser. I can right-click the Enum Types node and select Add New Enum Type. I'll name my type Ship Method. Enum types can support ints or bytes, but since my property is already an int, then I'll just use the default of int32. Now I can specify the enums. My ship methods will be land, sea, air, and of course Star Trek transporter. Although the values of enums are optional, I like to supply explicit values. That gives me the option of adding, editing, or removing enums in the future without getting the values out of sync. The flags attribute lets you define bitwise enums, which means that when defining an enum property, you can combine the members. In other words, you can say that a ship method is by land and by sea. I'll show you what this other option is for shortly. And then I'll go ahead and click OK. So now you can see that my ship method is listed in my enum types. And in the designer, the only way to see what the different members are is to go back and edit it again. I can do that by double-clicking or right-clicking and say Edit. So I'll just cancel that. Once I save the model and the code generator runs again, you can see a new file's been generated for ship method. And there's the enum that was generated based on the enum I defined in my model. Now that I've got my enum defined and the model is aware of it and the designer is aware of it, I can go ahead and change the type of the ship method to my new enum. Notice it's not alphabetical, but it gets placed at the bottom of the type list. So now when I want to define a query using that ship method, or I want to set or get the value of that, I can use the enum and not integers. When Entity Framework creates commands for queries or for updating the database, it will automatically translate the enum into the actual value, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. So that's creating an enum in the model. Now what I want to do is show you the alternate way, which is to let the model know about an enum that exists already, whether that's one that you created yourself, or it's part of another API, or it's part of the .NET Framework. So I'll start by deleting the enum that I created. And I've recreated the same enum in code. And I've given it a different name, alt ship method, so that you can really see it's different than the one I originally called ship method. So this exists in code, but the model still needs to be aware of it because when we query and when we do updates, Entity Framework depends on that metadata in the model. So we need to make the model aware of our external enum. So I'm back in the model browser, and I'll go ahead and add a new enum type again. This is important. My enum type name has to match the enum that's defined in the class. It doesn't matter what the namespace is, but the actual name of the enum. So I'll call this one alt ship method. Now I don't have to specify the members because they already exist, and then I will click Reference External Type, and here I have to put in the strongly typed name. And I'll go ahead and click OK. I'll save this. Now I can go back to the properties for the ship method property and choose AdventureWorks Super LT Model Alt Ship Method. So I'm not selecting the enum type that I defined myself in the class. I'm selecting the enum type I defined in the model, and then Entity Framework will figure out in the background that that actually points to the code-based enum type that I created. So this doesn't have to be my own definition. I could use something that's part of another API or the .NET framework. But you can also use your own enum, so that's what I've defined here. Now, in a later module in this course, I'll show you how to use these things in code. In this particular module, I just am focused on showing you how to set all this stuff up. The last thing I want to do with respect to the enum types is to look at the generated code again. Since the enum already exists in code, it didn't get regenerated by the code generator. However, I do want to show you that the sales order shipping class is aware that the ship method is based on that enum. It's nullable because it originally was nullable when it was a string. When I converted it to an int, I left it as nullable. So the nullability here is really based on my own configuration, not something that happened just because I'm using an enum.